Today I would like to talk about two ideas, and that is on individual and collective holiness. We've talked about it before, but today we're going to sort of drill down and examine at a deeper level. Now, what are we talking about? The difference between collective and individual holiness. I've said this before, and I'll say it again, that it appears, according to the wisdom of Hashem, that he judges collectively for the purpose of bringing the curve in. It's kind of a based on like your schoolwork. You remember in a classroom, a teacher would grade on a curve, right? Which meaning that someone that was kind of a little bit on the bottom could be lifted up by people that are on the top, et cetera, et cetera. When in Shmini, we're going to see that God calls us at the end to be holy as he is holy. And for crying out loud, you go, how in the world can we ever be expected to be holy as the Holy One, blessed be he? He is the ultimate example of holiness. Does he really mean that we become that pure and refined? Well, at some level, there must be a system set up in which he looks at us collectively and then judges us to be holy, or atones us to be holy as he is holy. Why do we say that? We see it reflected in the Balaam, when he's there to curse the Israelite people, and he says, and that God finds no guile within them, no wickedness in their tents. I'm thinking, hold on, the tent of Jacob? There's a lot of things that have gone wrong, and to include getting ready to have some very horrendous thing take place within a few weeks after this prophecy, but yet God doesn't see anything negative about it. It's like the mom who looks at their children, because she's a mom, in such a way that other people go, child's a little brat, right? But mom sees the redeemable factors of a child that other people don't see, right? My wife and I constantly go back and forth. When the grandchildren at my house, I feel that they should be a little bit disciplined, right? And she, as the grandmother, is like, no, they're little babies and they shouldn't be disciplined, right? And I'm not talking about like spanking them and punishment. I'm just talking about a little correction, but she thinks it's over the top. That's because she has that maternal instinct. You guys have that. Shmini is comprised of two main sections, which are ostensibly related. The first one deals with the dedication of the tabernacle, done by bringing offerings to atone and to purify the priest and ministering in the sanctuary, and all the Israelites as well. In the course of these festive events, we are told of the death of NETIV and Abihu, who met their end on this day because they, it says, quote, offered before the Lord alien fire. So we're going to find out, now though we don't know exactly what it was, and it's debated back and forth, but it's clear they took their fire pans that were assigned to them as part of their duty. The fire pan was to carry fire. You remember the altar had 3 fires on it. One was for the altar of incense, one was to maintain the main, the main fire, or the main offering fire, and the other one was for regular maintenance, so we had the incense and the sacrifice and the maintenance of the fire. Never goes out. Always. So these are fire pans that they would use to make sure that things are separated and here, there, etc. So at some level they decided to add some incense, whatever it was, motivated by the purest of motivation. They did not do this because they were trying to do some witchcraft or some voodoo. They were doing this because the very glory, Shekinah of God, came down, and fire was automatically ignited on the altar. They were excited. The joy was there. The people were shouting. It was an amazing time. And in their excitement, they came and decided to bring a little extra to draw close to God, and it took their life. We're going to learn something about that. The second part of this reading deals with forbidden foods. And you think, what in the world does forbidden foods have to do with the offerings? We're going to find out it's very important. Matter of fact, chapter 11 through 1, verse 1 through 28, talks about this. Immediately following each of these topics, the importance of distinguishing between impure and pure is briefly mentioned each time. Put in the back of your mind that as you read this Torah portion this week, we're going to be challenged, this whole thing between what is pure and impure. Now, for the sake of the study of Torah, when we see God say that this food is impure, what does he mean? Does he mean that it's sinful, that it's nasty, that it's that God doesn't like it? Now, what does it mean it's impure? It means it's not for you to eat. It doesn't contribute to your capability of bringing down holiness. Pretty simple, okay? And I really doubt it's even about good health or bad health.
It's not.
Right. It's really not. Even eating kosher is not about good health, because tell me, there's a lot of fat Jewish people, right?
Sugar is kosher.
Right. Sugar is very kosher, and they eat a lot of sugar, right? So the whole point is, it's not about what is impure is bad for you. It's the fact that the impurity of that animal, at some level, on a metaphysical, spiritual state, it brings down your capability of being holy. Now, what does that mean? We could spend hours in a discussion of that from the Zohar, et cetera, et cetera. But for this discussion, we're just going to understand that God distinguishes between what is pure and impure and what is sacred and profane. And it is very important for us to understand that to obtain holiness is to first be able to get handles on this concept. What is pure, what is impure, what is profane, and what is sacred. Being able to make distinction. First of all, for distinguishing between the unclean and the clean, verse 11:46, and after the second, the bulk of the second section in chapter 11, first of chapter 10 is dealing with the profane, and then the second is the bulk of the second section from 11:1 through 47, cites the types of clean and unclean animals and the laws pertaining to them. What makes an animal unclean? Is it because it eats nasty food? What? Speak real loud so everybody can.
The rabbis that I listen to in Spanish, he teaches on the Zohar.
Right.
He was explaining about reincarnations, and he was saying that a lot of the evil people in the world end up coming back as a lot of these unclean animals.
Unclean animals.
So
Interesting.
Eat those animals, you're taking on part of the evil that.
Okay, that's a good explanation. Yeah.
It's unclean because Hashem said it's unclean.
It's unclean because Hashem said it's unclean. Right. And so let's add this also. Why would it be unclean? Because of the fact that the animal itself participates in the consumption of other animals. It consumes its own.
And or sheds blood.
Or sheds blood, exactly. Why? It doesn't mean that the animal is doing something that's sinful, because that's how God programmed the animal to be. Animals cannot be sinful or bad. They're just animals, right? So, right. So it is designed to do that. So here should be the secret. Why could David not build the temple, the Basic Menage?
Bloody hands.
Bloody hands, a warrior. It wasn't because he was evil. It wasn't because he was a quote-unquote killer and a murderer. The fact that he was contaminated with the blood of war alleviated him from being able to build the Basic Menage. So that should tell us, once again, there's something about the shedding of blood. There's something about a murderous affair or killing or destruction of human life.
Taking life.
Taking life is huge. It's huge. So that means that if you're going to eat meat, it needs to be meat from an animal that doesn't take life, because it affects your holiness. It's a powerful thing, and we'll be able to talk about this in the discussion later on. Now, at first glance, the relationship between the sections may be a bit unclear, and a closer analysis of the verses gives the reason for these rulings, may provide better insight into the point juxtaposing these sections. The principle repeated throughout the reading, which also explains the relationship of various subjects contained in, is that of making distinctions between clean and unclean, between sacred and profane, between that which may be eaten and that which may not be eaten, between that which can be expiated and that which has no expiation. The principle is stressed throughout the reading and is in the context in this context that one should understand the regulations pertaining to the forbidden foods and the laws of purity. And at the end of the reading, the laws detaining the forbidding foods continue. You shall be holy. What does it say? For I am holy. These are the instructions concerning animals and birds and all the living creatures that move in the water and all the creatures that swarm the earth, for the distinguishing between the clean and unclean, between the living things that may be eaten and the living things that may not be eaten. Chapter 11, 45 through 47. Thus, we tie all these sections together to ask this question: how in the world and what in the world does that have anything to do with the Shekinah, the very presence of God coming down and dwelling amongst His people? This thread ties together the section of reading the principle and distinguishing. This principle appears to be teaching us that the way to purity and sanctity is by personal purification first. By separating oneself from impure objects and from people lacking a sustainable level of purity. In view of this, we cannot help but wonder about two contradictory basic elements found in Judaism in general, in this reading particular. Let's look at this. The first is the notion of distancing oneself from impure in order to achieve purity. This is the source of the emphasis on the laws of purification, kashrut, and the like, and it is necessary to set the distance between those who strictly observe such rules and others who do not. Indeed, at various stages in Jewish history, these laws were a factor in drawing social distinctions between various groups in the population. For example, in the Mishnah tractate, Demai distinguishes between the status of Haver, one who observes all the practices of ritual cleanness and purity, and Am Haaretz, and a common person who does not maintain the level of ritual purity necessary for the observance of the laws on tithes. The second principle found in our parashat related to holiness is the fundamental idea of unity. Unity requires that one turn a blind eye to internal contradictions in the nation and not dwell on the different levels of observance. Now let's stop for a second. What are we talking about? What we're talking about here is there are those who observed at the strictest level, the Haredi. Okay? Our Rabbi Avraham ben Yaakov, is Haredi. The rabbis in Houston that we deal with are at least Orthodox, if not Haredi. However, you can go to those same shuls and see people at all levels of practice. And that's one of the things that Rabbi Jacobian says to converts, and probably said this to you, is when you come in, and how will you react? This is one of the major questions. How will you react when you are trying to live into the highest level of observance, and you find an Israeli coming in here who's wearing shorts and flip-flops and doesn't look like he's had any level of observance? How are you going to feel about that, and what will you do? It's important. Well, of course, we know that the answer would be you do nothing, and you only are concerned about yourself. And it's the same thing here at NETIV. We work hard to only keep ourselves distinct and separate and holy before Hashem, and allow Hashem to work with other people. But the point is there is a collective holiness that brings us all up to a higher level. And that's what is incredible. We have a lot of people in our country over the last 2 years screaming out in protest that there's nothing great about America, right? And they say, well, if America was so great, we wouldn't have had the racism. If America is so great, we wouldn't have slavery. And in their mind, all they have seen was that which is negative and unclean and impure, and therefore they're judging all of the society as being that. Correct? There is a very dangerous thing. That is a very dangerous thing in any society. And it's the same thing when it comes to the society of those who follow after Hashem. I think the idyllic incubator for cultism is when we develop an attitude that everybody must be the same. And if we're not the same, then nobody is good and there's nothing redeemable about the community. That's what breeds cultism. Cultism says we all have to be the same.
Uniformity.
Uniformity. And there's a difference between uniformity and unity. Unity means that even despite the lack of uniformity, we still have unity. And that's why people can come here of different walks and different levels of understanding, and then find a place that is home. Because we do believe that not only is there individual responsibility for holiness, but there is also a collective holiness that the Creator of the universe looks at and allows us to benefit. This is where we get the idea that a tzaddik of a generation, that he can redeem that generation by his righteousness. How is that? Well, that means that all of the tzaddikim of this generation, for example, even though we have some that would say, oh, compared to 100 years ago, they're nothing like the tzaddiks of that generation. It doesn't matter. The fact that we do have tzaddikim and people that pray at the appointed times, that do everything according to halakha, Johnny on the spot, means that it brings the all together level of holiness up to a higher level.
The whole world.
The whole world, yeah. Think about it. Even the person that lives in a complete vacuum in their relationship with God, they're elevated because of the tzaddikim. And I would like to say that it's not just the tzaddikim in the world, but it's also the righteous people of the nations like you and I, who help to bring up those people that have no connection to God. And that's why it's important for us to understand that you distinguishing in your daily life between what is good and bad and what is pure and impure and what is profane and what is holy is very, very important. Distinguishing that in your behavior and your conversation and what you view on television and what you read in newspapers, etc., it makes a huge difference. And a rabbi just the other day sent a text out. I don't know if you got it, but he was wanting to talk about a book that he's written. He's really into the whole thing about bringing Torah to the nations, universal Torah. He's really excited about all this stuff. And he has a book, and it's the laws of the Dah for the non-Jew, the laws of purification for a non-Jew, and also the concept of premarital relations and etc. And he says, though the laws of nidah and purification doesn't apply like it would to an Orthodox Jewish family or person, there are a tremendous amount of value that comes to the individual non-Jew who begins to implement those. Not only that, but there's also a tremendous amount of mazel, good things that begin to happen when a person practices those things. Now, I would say in a vast majority of very conservative Christian people probably practice, the whole dating scene, not having relationships before marriage, etc. And though the nations may not be required to do those things, does that help to bring about the collective holiness of a nation? Yes, absolutely.
It may not be an obligation, but it's definitely not prohibited.
Absolutely. And if anything, we should be encouraging people to do those things, because once again, it brings up the level of holiness. It is interesting to say this. It says, Leviticus 9:23 describes the presence of the Lord as appearing, notice this, quote, to all people. Who were the all people? The divine presence? It was everybody. It was the Erev Rav. It was the guy who was from Sudan, who was in Egypt. Now his family is with the Israelites. It was the Levites. It was Dan, the tribe of Dan. Everybody. And this is what, I love this quote. It says, to all people. Therefore, the divine presence does not distinguish between one person and another. It's beautiful. On establishing the sanctuary, it is written, let them make me a sanctuary that I might dwell among them. What is the Basic Menage? It is a house of prayer for
all people.
That's why with great exuberance I was able to tell this South African Ben Noach that when Mashiach comes, that he's not just coming for the Jewish people and to be the king of the Jewish people, but he's coming to bring elevation to all mankind and all creation. I don't even begin to understand how a wolf will lay down with a lamb. I don't even know what that means. But I'm going to tell you right now, we're going to be living in a world in which we have returned back to Gan Eden like it was intended to be. The question arises whether the proper way to achieve greater holiness is by personal purification and individual concern with sanctity, and that is distinguishing between clean and unclean, or by collective purification, stemming from a notion of the unity of people as a whole. These two contradictory complement each other. I want to try to be careful, okay? I am absolutely orthodox in my approach to all things Torah, okay? And I have to be very careful, however, not to fail to appreciate the collective unity of the Jewish people. Because there are a lot of Jews, the vast majority of Jews are not Orthodox. Go to Shul, Rabbi Yacobian, how many of them are Israelis who probably are not very observant?
Well, I'll tell you the statistics that Rob Yacobian mentioned.
I'd be interested. What is it?
Concerning the entire nation of Jewish people,
right.
80% are not observant.
Right, 80% are not observant.
The statistics say that by the next generation, they will not be, that 80% will not be Jewish.
Right. That's scary. Okay, so, but let's put this in the context of what we're reading. Just because 80% are not observant, does that mean that the 80% should not understand that God does not distinguish? That God, they too can have an observant, or they too can have a relationship with God that is real, legitimate, that is powerful at whatever level they're on. And that's what I'm trying to say. I'm talking, yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry, it was 80% of American.
Yeah, American Jewry, yeah.
I want to clarify,
right. Yeah,
in American.
That's correct. Right. So with that being said, every person has the ability to connect to God at their own level. And I want to emphasize, or especially you to watch on of great rabbis teaching, amazing. And when they're finished, they feel like, who am I? Right? I'm like, I'm way out here in the middle of nowhere. I have no access to the community. I can't even buy kosher food except for the few cans of tuna I buy. And they're trying their very best to do things on an individual basis. And it seems so low. It seems so far away of Orthodox Judaism. But we have to learn a lesson from this. If we don't, is when discouragement comes, wanting to just give up. And I don't want anybody to give up because they don't feel like that they're holy. That God, the holiness of all people, on that. Try to do the best you can. The whole. What happens with the challah bread when it's baked and cooked? A piece is taken off, right? And it's burnt. What's the purpose? Do y'all know? Why?
To remember the bread.
The portion of the Levites, right?
That used to be something that every household was required to give.
Absolutely.
As a portion for the Levite.
So what is the statement? That the portion elevates the whole. It is if you have given the whole loaf with that one little portion. What does that say about collective holiness? That every effort that a person makes in their life, every effort, is just a little bit. It just seems like such a little morsel. But I want you to understand that it elevates the whole. It not only elevates you as a whole person, but it also elevates everyone around you and makes that a better, makes things a better place. Let's take a second look, or closer look at the account of the tabernacle's dedication. We see that it contains more than unifying elements. For both contradictory elements are interlaced in the description of the tabernacle's dedication. One approach is mentioned at the beginning of the reading, and it says this in Leviticus 9:6. This is what the Lord has commanded that you do, that the presence of the Lord may appear to you. The objective, according to what is said here, is for the divine presence to dwell among the people to connect with God. Indeed, this happened as described in the verse cited above. Note that the descent of the Lord's presence is not tied to any specific commandment being performed. It's interesting. The second objective of the tabernacle dedication follows this quote, found in Leviticus 9:7. Then Moses said to Aaron, "Come forward to the altar and sacrifice your sin sacrifice your sin offering and your burnt offering, making expiation for yourself and for the people, and sacrifice the people's offering and make expiation for them as the Lord has commanded." As the plain sense of the verse indicated, the main object here is individual expiation along with the collective expiation. Expiation, or kapara, a concept that involves a distinction between one person and another, between those fortunate to be expiated and those who are not, appears hand in hand with the sacrificial service. The climax of the Day of Atonement, expiation, and purification demands spiritual effort, rewarded by sanctity only at the end. Thus, expiation is not a passive, all-inclusive concept like divine presence. Rather, it is a result of positive spiritual endeavor. The call on us to be holy does not appear until the end. And this is interesting. After all the distinctions have been set forth between clean and unclean, and between the sacred and profane, between that which may be eaten and that which may not be not eaten, etc., attaining a high level of holiness is an individual matter. It requires expiation, purification, spiritual effort. In the whole theophany of Mount Sinai, only Moses attained the necessary degree of holiness to ascend to the mountain. His level of holiness was far beyond anybody else's holiness. However, everybody had to be holy. Was everybody holy like Moshe? No. Was everybody holy like Aaron? No. But everyone was holy like they were supposed to be holy. Do you see the difference? So that means that Hashem is not going to be judging you in the council of judgment based on somebody else. He's going to be judging us individually. This is what we're talking about. Individual, not individual versus collective, but in the whole idea of individual and collective holiness. Meaning that there is both. There's a collective holiness which sort of undergirds us all, thank God. And then there's an individual holiness that God says, I'm going to hold you accountable for what you could do. It is. It's the amazing grace of God. The amazing loving kindness of the Creator of the universe. He's going to look at an individual based on what you knew and what you could do. And when I told that young South African man, look, when Mashiach comes, he's going to judge all the nations. All the nations will be judged based on what they were able to accomplish and what they were able to do as in positive and not being a wicked person. Yes?
I think you just answered my question. I was writing down, is there a danger in someone having the attitude, we've got this collective holiness, so I can live any way I want to because I'm going to get credit for what the righteous do.
Right,
I think you just answered it.
Right, yeah.
We can't have that attitude.
As a matter of fact, that attitude negates the holiness that I would even attempt to do, because it's about kavanah, it's about intention. If I'm going, well, I'm just slide because of it. So what's going to happen when I'm judged? Hashem says, you know, you gave yourself a break where I didn't give you a break on that. You should have done what you could have done. Yes, Adam?
The individual either adds to or detracts from the collective holiness.
Right, right. Are you a contributor or not? Right. And it's not about whether you contributed like someone else did, but you contributed according to what you did. Remember when the temple was built, and it says that everybody gave, how much did they give? According to what they could give, their heart. They gave from the heart. So the whole point is what is individual holiness? It's about everyone doing what they can do. Yes, ma'am.
What Sandy was talking about, isn't that more like the great thing? think about what everybody else does.
You know what? That's a good point. So I'm going to repeat this for those who are listening. It was asked, is this sort of like eating the bread of shame that we talked about when before creation our souls were eating of the divine presence of Hashem and sustaining ourselves on that beautiful divine presence, and we all were receiving the same amount without any merit, without any ability to have merited on our own, and in some way it was kind of embarrassing and shameful that we're experiencing this without ever having merited it. So we all asked, Hashem, give us an ability to merit this beautiful presence. And that's why we're here in this body going through the difficulties of our life, because you are setting yourself up to merit the great beauty of the divine presence. Yes?
There's two major roles in the world that is encompassed by that idea.
Yeah.
The role of the righteous non-Jew,
right,
and the role of the righteous Jew.
And both equally important.
Yeah, you can't have one without the other.
Right.
Rabbi Yaakov Wolbe pointed this out. It's a simplistic explanation. There's much depth to it that would take hours to go into.
Right.
But the idea of the role of the righteous non-Jew is to maintain the goodness of the world, to take things out of the world and use them for a good and holy purpose, according to what Hashem says is good and holy.
Right.
And also to keep it from being polluted and destroyed.
Right.
The role of the righteous Jew is to do the same, to take things from the world and do good things according to Hashem's will, but also to repair the things that have been broken.
Right.
So it's like the difference between the BMW manufacturer and the BMW mechanic.
Right. Yeah, it's a very good point.
They're both absolutely necessary, and neither one is greater than the other.
Right.
It's just a different role.
A different role. And we should be fine with the fact that this is what helps to determine what the collective holiness is. Now let's, before we close, talk about the contradictory aspects of the two elements. The descent of the divine presence and the service of atonement in the sanctuary can be seen in the description of the divine presence descending on the day of Solomon. According to the account given there, the sacred service in the temple could not be continued because the divine presence had descended. The scriptural account indicates some sort of contradiction between divine presence descending and the temple worship being carried out. According to these emphases, which we find in this week's reading, it appears that the correct way to attain greater sanctity is through personal expiation. Follow a way of distinguishing and separating, and not by a way that is equal for all. Meaning that every person has to do what they can do to distinguish and to understand the difference between profane and holy, etc., and that upon each one doing what we can do, not all doing what we at some equal level, then the divine presence dwells among people. And it is also dependent on the endeavors of the individual only after a strict adherence to the laws of purity and proper expiation and to obtain sanctity. So, with this being said, what do we learn about collective and individual holiness that is profound for this lesson? It's that the divine presence is going to return back to the Basic Menage. It's going to return. We have the Temple Institute is working so hard to see that accomplished. You can even buy coins now that helps to go to help support the temple. There's activity. There is now the talk. You saw me post some email, some text up about this whole talk about bringing the nations that have Jewish connection to Judaism and to be an active, some redemptive factor is taking place. And so I would say this, for the Haredi, don't forget to do what you're supposed to do. We need to encourage every Orthodox Jew to be the best Orthodox Jew you can be. And for Jews that are out there, the 80% that are not Haredi, strive to be closest to God that you ever been in your life and try to live at the highest level of purity that you ever have been in your life. Study Torah, draw close to God. And for the rest of the nations out there, the people in the nations that are righteous non-Jews who are not in Avodah Zarah, be the best that you can be, because redemption's coming. If we want to help usher in and bring a sweet redemption, then we all will focus upon ourselves and not on others. It matters little what other people do. It matters what I do and what my family will do. And if we will all do that, then at some level, the collective holiness will reach a crescendo and Mashiach will come and will bring redemption. That concludes this year, and we can get into the discussion.